I have to say I'm a bad user of Slack in CFML terms. First of all, I think it's just good for instant help. If you're stuck, somebody can help you and you can move on. But I'm a very bad user, even a very bad receiver of support. If I'm stuck, I either DM Misha or Mark, and that's it.
ColdFusion Alive, the podcast for the ColdFusion community. Discover practices, tools, techniques, tips and trends for modern ColdFusion development. Brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Here is your host, the founder of TerraTech, Michaela Light.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with these amazing ColdFusion experts. We've got Charlie Arehart, Gert Franz, Ben Nadel, and Mark Drew from all over the world. Got Charlie's in the middle of the United States in Kentucky. Ben is in I think
Flyover country.
Flyover country, yeah. Ben is in the Edge country on the East Coast in New York. Mark is joining us, I think, from London in the United Kingdom. He's probably got the Queen in the background celebrating a jubilee with her ColdFusion apps. Yeah, there she is. She can't come on camera right now. We'll bring her in.
Come on, Doris. Come on.
I think that's one of the corgis behind you there,
yeah.
Mark.
They've eaten a little bit too much right now. Yeah.
Yes, and Gert is joining us from the center of Europe. Which part of Europe are you in? Switzerland or some other?
The neutral one.
The neutral one, yes, that must be Switzerland.
Allegedly neutral, yes.
Allegedly, yes.
The Queen had tea with one of your compatriots this weekend, Paddington Bear from Deepest, Darkest Peru, which is, I believe, where
Paddington,
you are now.
Yes.
So,
I hope she served marmalade sandwiches to him.
They did. They exactly did. He brought his own, and apparently she had one in her handbag, which I never knew about, Doris, our Queen.
Always good to have a marmalade sandwich in your handbag in case of emergencies, in case you have a really hard to solve ColdFusion bug. You can whip it out, munch down on it, and then that revives your brain so you can solve the problem. That's a tip for everyone. So this is part 2 of our panel discussion on Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy ColdFusion, or CFML, as they like to say. And if you haven't checked out last time, I'll put it in the show notes. But part 1, we covered ease of programming, modern IDE, open source versus closed source, licensing differences, some of the cool features in Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy, ease of installation, community and third-party tools, and engine speed, scalability, and performance. So all of those topics, check out the first part. But this time, we're going to be talking about other things in Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy, all the way cool places you can get documentation from, how you can get help and support, some of the podcasts out there, and engine updates. And we'll probably talk about some other things too, because Gert gave us an extensive list of extra topics that we will work on fitting into the episode, along with any other topics that Charlie, Ben, and Mark provided. So, and then if you don't know these guys, Charlie is a performance tuning optimization general ColdFusion expert. He helps out people when their servers are broken. Gert is part of the Lucy, I don't know what you call it, the Lucy consortium. Association, yes, there you go. And he works on both supporting people with Lucy and also developing the Lucy engine. Ben is a extensive blogger. He posts more on LinkedIn and Facebook and writes posts. Yeah, I don't know how you get any work done, Ben, because you write all these amazing posts every day.
I wake up very early.
No, I think they're generated. You have to random buttons. So.
Oh, it's an AI. This isn't the real Ben.
Yeah, there's new AI tools. He just says, I want to talk about this topic, and the AI just goes right past me.
There you go. If you haven't checked out Ben's blog, he's got one of the most popular ColdFusion blogs out there. So check it out. Lots of cool investigations he does into new features in Adobe ColdFusion and a bit of Lucy. He's been doing a lot of Lucy stuff recently.
Even though sometimes folks just go there to see their own picturing.
Yes, he's famous for taking pictures with other people. other ColdFusion developers. And then Mark is an epic Lucee developer these days, and he works on really big sites. I did an interview with him. I'll stick it in the show notes, where he was converting, I think, gigabytes of data. It was quite amazing. So welcome, guys.
Now we've increased the amount of data that we're doing. So
oh my God, even more than gigabytes.
Yeah, no, I now do a lot more on the DevOps and application building side.
Oh,
so I've moved from worrying too much about gigabytes of data. That's Gert's job. I make sure that I try to do artisanal code, which goes from farm to table, or from your IDE to the server in the most gracious and robust and QA'd way possible. So that's my new hat.
Excellent. Good to have a new hat. Always good to be learning in ColdFusion and any programming language, I think. So let's start by talking about documentation, because I think that's a key thing. Any programming language or tool that has dubious documentation is not easy to learn. So where do we go to for documentation, guys, for Adobe ColdFusion and then for Lucee?
I have a bone to pick on this, because this is literally how I got into the CFML world. Back when CF Eclipse was, I couldn't afford any editors at the time, and you had to pay for all of them. There weren't any free ones. And I got involved in CF Eclipse, and my first feature that I built for CF Eclipse as a contributor was to do the help documentation. So like if you pressed F1 over a tag, it would send you, or go and get, I can't remember, it's been a while now, the CF docs. So I can't remember who I worked with at the time that we got like little links for all the tags and stuff like that. So I've spent a lot of my life looking at Lucee docs, looking at CFML docs, looking at figuring out different ways to cut and slice the docs, because, as you say, there's two docs, right, at the moment. But say there's Lucee and ColdFusion docs, right? But then you go like, well, what about which version? What about, it's the 2019 or whatever, version? And that's kind of important, because like some tags are deprecated and what have you, So yeah, I have a dog in this fight, and there's that one. It's Sleepy.
But you didn't say what the solution to that was.
CF,
the answer we all would have said.
Docs.org.
There you go. CFdocs.org. Absolutely.
Yeah, which was I think Pete Freitag did that one years later. He did it really well. We have different solutions with Lucee, with docs.lucee.org. Not sure what Adobe is doing with the CFML docs. That's a Charlie question, because I haven't gone to them. But I keep on ending up on the ColdFusion 9 docs whenever I Google anything. Or Ben's blog, obviously. But, but docs are hard. I mean, you have, a lot of stuff in there.
One thing that strikes me always is when I go to the documentation, even in Lucee or CF Docs or the Lucee Docs, they mostly give me the latest documentation, right? So if I'm stuck on an older version, then I might need to have the older version of the documentation. That's why there is a rudimentary documentation within the Lucee admin. So if you go to Lucee /Lucee/docs.cfm or doc.cfm, you get the documentation for that installation that you have on your machine. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wish cfdocs.org would have some kind of a drop down saying, what version would you like? Here you go. And then you just get that documentation, because very often you're inclined to use a feature, and that feature can't be used because it is not there or is deprecated or whatever. And that's why I actually insisted on us having a docs.cfm within Lucee, because we have everything is coming from tags and from two functions in Lucee. You get the documentation. It just extracts it from the internal description of the function or tag.
And I don't know if people know this, but there's trycfm.org, which is included in the Lucee docs anyway. I don't know about, again, there are other providers available. Your mileage may vary, but which allows you to try out that code immediately, because there's one thing of going like, okay, how does an array slice work? I have to picture it. I have to code it. I have to spin up something to try it. But try CFM is great because within the docs you can copy paste or you have examples and do that. And I think that has been a massive step forward in CFML, is being able to like try it there and then, like looking at a funky function. What does dump do? Dump's like not used in a lot of other languages. You have to like console log and do various other things, but being able to see a whole structure and use it is magnificent.
Let me speak to those couple of things that Mark just mentioned. So in addition to trycfm.com, which supports ColdFusion and Lucy and prior versions of both, including, I think, even back to CF10. So it's 10, 11, 2016, 2018, and 2021. Adobe also has cffiddle.org. So let's go ahead and add that to that list. Yeah, there you go. Thanks. cffiddle.org. And that's been out for a couple of years, but it's not as well known because it's only going to be talked about by that community, as opposed to both communities. And the CF docs do have examples that point to that. They don't tend to point to trycfm.com. So yeah, that each organization is learning from each other and making things better. cfdocs.org, another benefit of that is that anybody can contribute examples to that, whereas you can't contribute to the CF docs as readily. You, I assume, can contribute readily to the Lucy docs, although I saw a thread of discussion about that just last week, I believe, and it was kind of surprising to see what one has to go through to contribute to the docs, because it's a build process and you have to really set up to be. Yeah, go ahead.
That's to build all of the docs, though. That's a weird one. That's like, hey, I want to regenerate all of the tags and functions within the Lucy docs. And again, I know I sound like it's just because this is what I know. You can actually have direct links to GitHub. So you can go like, click here and you create a PR with. So I do this all the time. I do pull requests all the time for typos and descriptions. Yeah,
so the Lucy docs do have GitHub. A capability to edit just.
They've got like, it's more generating like more complicated things, sure. Like if you add a new arguments and things like that.
Right. But if you just want to
and Charlie,
that's great.
Just to clarify that, Charlie, this is for the integrated documentation when you install Lucy, right?
Gotcha.
It's not for the official documentation which is out there, which is based on pull requests, and they are merged into the Lucy documentation as well. But the good thing is about that, they are generated from the tags and functions that are existing within that version.
But if somebody wanted to add an
require a pull request.
If somebody wanted to add an example, they could do that through GitHub?
Yes. They can do that on the docs.lucy.org page. There you can add examples and everything.
And does that end up editing a GitHub page?
Yes.
Excellent.
Exactly.
I so wish Adobe would do that, because right now the Adobe docs are locked up in an Adobe, proprietary system. And in fact, let me throw this out too for folks, just quickly, since we're talking about docs. One thing is that and I've been on this horse for years and still not well known by a lot of people. Many people, when they do Google stuff and they do get to the Adobe docs, all they get to is the CFML reference. And that's understandable. But the CFML reference is just one of several different docs with ColdFusion. And you really can't learn how to use the thing from the CFML reference. That's like trying to learn to speak a language by reading a dictionary. Right. And yet that's what most people do because that's all they're led to. Well, there's the developer's guide, the ColdFusion developer's guide. And it's like, if you could print out a PDF of it, it'd be 3,000 pages. It's a big document, and it's got a lot of explanation of how things work and how a feature works and more examples. And just sad that most people don't ever find it. But even more sad is that back in the CF 2016 timeframe, Adobe was forced, the CF team was forced to move their docs into this Adobe proprietary doc system. They didn't write it. Adobe people did. And it supported all Adobe products. Well, most Adobe products were, had relatively simplistic docs. CF's docs go back to, early versions of CF, 4, 5, 6. If you look at them, over the years, they've just gotten bigger and bigger, but they're very deep. And they might be, like a book with a chapter, with a section and a subsection. And unfortunately, that system that Adobe was forced to put the docs into it doesn't know how to traverse more than about 3 levels deep. So if you've ever noticed, if you Googled something and ended up on a docs page and it was like a couple paragraphs and it was clear there was more that followed it, but there was nothing following it, that's what happens. They might take you to this like island of information, which has no bridges to it, no airports on it. You're stuck with just that little island. And it's sad. There's no next previous. There's no, what do you call them? Breadcrumbs at the top. There's no.
So you know the context of it.
Right. There's no context. There's not even a left navigational toolbar. And I've complained about this over and over. And the CF team feels like there's nothing that can be done. And that's just so sad because that developer's guide is awesome. Now, that leads back to a point Drew, Gert made earlier, is that they used to produce a PDF of each version's docs. And if somebody were to Google ColdFusion docs archive or ColdFusion docs PDF, you'd see that there's a page at Adobe's site that was kept up to date with links to the CF11, CF10, CF9, and each of the PDFs. And so I still point people to that page and say, look, get the developer's guide from CF11. That was the last one they produced. And that's also related to this new doc system. It can't produce a PDF more than 3 levels deep. And so they did in 2016 try to produce that PDF. Mm-hmm. And if you saw it, it was like 200 pages. And if you didn't know that it should have been 3,000 pages, you went, hey, but if you read it, you'd get like, a paragraph or two into a subject. And again, it would just stop. It was terrible. So they gave up on that and they no longer produce PDFs at all. Oh. And it's so sad. And a lot of people don't know this, but so just get the CF PDF and you will learn stuff. If you've never seen those docs before, you'll learn amazing stuff.
This podcast is brought to you by TerraTech, the ColdFusion experts. Develop, secure, optimize. Get detailed show notes on today's episode and your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at terratech.com. That is TERATECH.com. And now back to today's show.
Amazing tip, Charlie. Maybe they should rewrite that doc system in ColdFusion and then it would work well.
If only they had a programming language they could rewrite it in.
Yeah,
we should send them a copy of Lucee.
or folks could just go to Ben Nadel's page. That's where they blog. That's where they learn how to program.
To piggyback on something Charlie said, one thing that I think the Adobe docs do really well historically is clearly articulate what's in a new release or what are the new features in a new release. So you can say, I go to ColdFusion 2021 and it's, here's a 40-page document that outlines all the new functions and plugins and whatnot. And Lucee, I have a little bit of trouble sometimes understanding what's available in the new stuff. Like on the Lucee dev forums, there's always a new release post and it lists a lot of the JIRA tickets that have been closed as part of the release. So you can go through the JIRA tickets and roughly see what it is. But there is something nice about Adobe sort of making that a very first-class citizen. It's a little easier to consume at a glance.
Well, it's very simple. Just go to our release manager and tell him to do that. Oh, we don't have one.
I thought Patrick was your release manager. Is he not doing that anymore?
No, it's actually no. The thing is this: Zach does a great job on explaining. Zach Spitzer does a great job on explaining what's coming into and what's not coming into it. But he recently more or less took that over. And what we can definitely do once we jump from 5.9 to 5.10 or to 6. Then we should maybe take an article and just write everything that's in there. And especially maybe group the tickets a little better so that you can see these are new features, these are regressions, and these are bug fixes or what have you.
And given Lucee is open source, if anyone listening wants to contribute to that, and I'm sure they can contact Gert.
Yes.
And
it's such a small team.
By the way, Ben, hang on, Ben, if you want to contribute, not a problem.
I know. I feel bad ever bringing it up because it is so open source. And Zach,
you shot to his credit, in the foot,
to Zach's credit, he has oftentimes told me to just open PRs for stuff, and I am very lazy about that.
Maybe we should one of the things that you have in October, I'm pretty sure it's October, I might be wrong on the month, is a bug bounty. So it's like how many pull requests, right? Is it November? Hack November? October, yeah, October. So Hacktober, sorry, not Hattober, but Hacktober. Which you get like free t-shirts and things like that. So maybe we should sponsor a few, do 10 pull requests. And like a lot of the pull requests that I do every week, even to for example, to Autus, to Command Box, to their documentation. Sometimes it's just docs. I'm reading it and go like, that's a typo. That makes no sense or whatever. And if I can do it, I just do it and put it out there and carry on with my life, because it's not, I think, is getting used to be able to do those pull requests and do them pretty quickly. And once you've done a couple, it's I'm not going to say it's second nature because it's not complicated, but it's just the barrier to entry of doing one is doing one, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, going from 0 to 1.
This could be a future Ben post. He does all these great posts. How to do your first pull request if you're a pull virgin.
Pull virgin.
Yes. I just want, with new features, I do want to mention Charlie does this amazing series of articles and blog posts, talks on, he calls them hidden gems in whatever the version is. I think that's been exclusively Adobe ColdFusion. I don't think he's done that for Lucee yet, but maybe in the future, you never know.
It's too expensive for us.
Nobody pays me to do that stuff.
I just had to find an angle. Sorry, I just had to find an angle.
Maybe you can share a link to that, because I did a Google search for Charlie's hidden gems and found a lot of them, but there's no one link that says here are all the hidden gems in Charlie's universe, and here's how to dig them up. So.
Well, I just put a link into the show notes. And by the way, I assume you'll be sharing the show notes later.
Oh, absolutely. Show notes are a vital part of the podcast.
Sure. So I shared earlier. So I shared earlier a link to the discussion about, did you know there's far more to the CF docs than just the CFML reference? And that's the one also where I talk about the size of the docs and how the PDF problem happened and where to find the old PDF. So that's all there. And then as far as Hacktoberfest, that's a more generic thing than just Lucee, and the point was really more to say that Lucee does participate in Hacktoberfest, and I put a link there to Hacktoberfest. And then
maybe we can convince the Adobe dev team to participate in that. There's no reason why they couldn't, right? I know they're not open source, but people
you can't do pull requests.
Oh, you can't do pull requests. Oh, dear.
Nothing like that.
Oh, well.
And as far as the hidden gems, I just provided a link to my presentations page, because that's got them. If somebody goes there and searches for hidden gems, they'll find all the versions I've done. And anyway, we got an article back to CF 401 was the very first hidden gems article I did.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ancient hidden gems.
Yeah, and some of them are still useful today.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate you doing that, Charlie. I think we should wrap up this documentation section, because we could talk about improving ColdFusion docs and all the resources for a whole episode, I'm sure, but we have other topics to cover. I do want to mention how that the Autus guys who do all the box products have great documentation. They have all these books on their products that they put in Git open books, or whatever the correct technical term for that is. And then Luis, I interviewed Luis about his Learn CFML in 100 Minutes book and some of his new books coming out this year. And that book's a great book. I learned new things from it. I thought I knew everything in CFML, but I still learned new stuff in there. And then his 102 tips and tricks book on ColdBox, learned new stuff in there too, even though we use that a lot. And then I do want to mention, we kind of mentioned in passing, but most of the IDEs, you mentioned CF Eclipse, Mark, but the VS, I can't even say the bloody thing.
VS Code.
VS Code, thank you. I wanted to get an extra letter slipped in there. VS Code and all the other IDEs have amazing help just built in. I mean, I know when I first started doing ColdFusion in, I think it was 1997 or something, we didn't have IDEs back then. We crept out of our paper bags where we lived in the street, if you remember that Monty Python sketch, and then we had to use Notepad to edit our ColdFusion. Now we're so lucky. We've got VS Code, we've got the new Adobe VS Code add-on, and we've got Sublime, and you name it. I'm probably missing out on your favorite editor, sure. But they're all very helpful.
Home site.
Home site. Yes, there you go. Dreamweaver.
Classic.
Yes. So yeah, lots of things out there. If anyone listening has other suggestions or things you think are missing in the CF Docs world, do speak up. I will also just mention Learn CF in a Week, because although that's more a learning site than a doc site, but it has amazing stuff in it. They revamped it a few years ago, so that's worth checking out as well. And also CF Casts, if you love videos, they have like 300 plus videos on ColdFusion, which again, more learning than documentation, but I've learned a lot through it. So let's move on to how do you get help for your ColdFusion? You get stuck, you need tech support. What are the different ways to achieve that?
I think it depends what kind of help you're looking for. If you say support, that generally to me defines that the product that you bought is not working as expected, right? And you're trying to get round an issue. I think since day immemorial, we've had the how do I do this kind of question, that there's some great resources out there, both from Stack Overflow, which we have to mention. I mean, the copy and paste bonanza that I've had from Stack Overflow has meant most of my code breaks pretty quickly. But I think there are different things. Is that, and if you've got people from Lucee, and you're talking about support on the actual product, there's two ways around it, right? It's like, well, you can provide support on the product, but that's done by Razor, Gert's company, which provides commercial support for Lucee because you haven't paid for it. And Adobe, I presume part of the price is a certain amount of support tickets. But I don't know how far, if I was running Adobe ColdFusion, how far we'd go, right? Because they're supporting the product itself, and then they're supporting your application built on that product. I think we should define, you can define whatever. We can talk about whatever you want, but, I think there are kind of like shades of difference between here. It's like, ColdFusion is broken. It doesn't do the thing it says in the book it should. That's one level of support. Or I don't know how to do a CF login. That's it.
Or something's broken, and how do I fix it?
Mm-hmm. I get most of my help from the various forums. Lucee has their dev. It was like dev.lucee.org is really great. And then there's an Adobe ColdFusion forum as well. I go to that less frequently just because professionally I'm doing Lucee, but both seem to be very responsive. A lot of community-driven support.
What's the main resource for Adobe kind of discussion? Sorry.
The Adobe ColdFusion forums. I mean, if you mean on the Adobe website, it'd be their forums, which is community.adobe.com.
Okay, right.
So it's the same forums that have existed forever, and they're just as active as ever. They're still very active. There's several threads a day usually. So it's just there's people that live in different worlds, but for sure there was some starting to be discussion about other community resources, and we've got in the notes that we would have gotten to these, but let's get them out before anybody thinks we're not thinking of them. There's of course a CFML Slack, and that is incredibly active. And if you're a Slack fan, you should definitely be on the CFML Slack. Anybody can join it. There are many different, categories of subject channels, and people often ask questions there and get answers within seconds or minutes. And, if I'll have to admit, I'm not a fan of Slack because to me, it's like a river.
Neither.
And the river's flowing all the time. And if I'm standing on the side of the river, stuff goes flowing by.
Yeah, and the CFML Slack is problematic because it's ephemeral information, and because it's a free Slack, and if you want it not to be free, it's super expensive, right? Because it's like X amount per person. Slack is not very good for communities because, one, you can't do very fast searches into the back. I think there's X amount of, starts wiping information, so it's not there all the time. It's very difficult to find by topic or anything like that. And also it's not, as you say, it's like a river of stuff. I can't just search for an answer from somewhere else. And I've noticed a lot of topics become very, I have to read a whole book to find the answer, right? And it's a whole book of different comments. So it's like,
It's
I mean, I've got
split into different places because even though it supports threading, somebody will reply in the thread and somebody else will just reply on the main channel, and it's very disjointed. Right. And we should say that so people understand. Again, we're not knocking it, and that some people love it. Slack did add threads, and the threads do help tremendously in that now you could focus on all the discussion of a particular topic because it's in a thread and it opens in a separate window. But the problem I have is that one has to think to respond to the thread, and if they don't, then that's not in the thread, and then sometimes there's different answers in different places.
It's a general weakness of all Slack, not just this
or any kind of
every one. And also it's very It's very interrupt driven. It's kind of very in the
all sort of chat systems like that. What was that thing that there was a group of people that loved talking on it. Back about 15 years ago, it was just a chat
ICQ
system.
Or what?
It was whatever followed that.
AIM?
Messenger? AIM?
No. But anyway, the point is they all have that dilemma. Is that it's, and even Twitter, I would argue, is the same. Where it's just a river of stuff.
Absolutely.
But back to the point about searching it. Let me just throw out that I had learned recently of a third-party service that's currently free for open source Slack communities called Linen. I think it's linen.dev. And I had mentioned it on the Slack, and Sean Corfield, who still is kind of heading up the Slack, saw it and took it under his wing and arranged a meeting with the folks from Linen and talked through because there's, of course, lots of challenges. And I could foresee that there would be people that would complain about this or that. Anyway, I didn't say what the point is. The point is Linen as a service provides for exposing the Slack content via a searchable interface and browsable interface. So it basically, makes a Slack's
search
content
possible,
available even through, Google search could eventually find it. And I had learned of that from another organization, a company that uses Slack for their support. And they celebrated that they had done it so that people searching for things, on Google and Bing and stuff could now find that stuff. And I thought, that's another beef I've had with Slack is it's locked up in there if you didn't know it was there. So anyway, Sean took that under his wing. He looked into it. He felt his answers he got satisfactory answers, and he did it. And so that is now there. And he did a blog post. I don't know if somebody else did. I haven't done one yet, but that's a step in the right direction. Now, of course, let me just say, I'm sure somebody listening to this is broiling at the thought that, wait a minute, you're telling me that stuff I wrote on Slack is now open to the public. And as Sean said in reply, when you signed up for the Slack, it wasn't a private system. It's a public system. So, that's a debatable point. And so he pointed out how it was clear in the terms of agreement and all that stuff. So anyway, I'll leave folks who are interested in that subject to look into it more.
Yeah. I have to say I'm a bad user of Slack. In CFML terms. First of all, I think it's just good for instant help. If you're stuck, somebody can help you and you can move on. But I'm a very bad user, even a very bad receiver of support. If I'm stuck, I either DM Misha or Mark, and that's it.
Well, I mean, it's a good pattern in yes, getting the right people, but in the greater ecosystem of the web, apart from just Lucee and everything else, sometimes finding who the people are responsible for certain projects, and you say, I'm trying to do this, you'll actually get a better answer than, how do I do this with this? Because they'll say, well, what are you trying to do? And the answer sometimes comes back is, it's more conceptual than the individual. I had a conversation yesterday with Brad Wood about trying to solve something. I'm saying, I'm trying to do this tiny little, I'm trying to do this like this. And he said, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And we discussed and then realized there was a much simpler solution if we just took a different path. And I think this is a good habit to get into. Sometimes this we call it rubber ducking, talk to the rubber duck, but sometimes you can talk to like actual human beings on the internet that know all about this.
Yeah, just explaining the problem to someone else often helps you figure it out yourself, or they'll ask questions you never thought of. I will say that the Facebook CF programmers group, or whatever, ColdFusion programmers group, is very good for that. I mean, it's not quite as snappy as Slack. But, usually get answers within the same day. And the great advantage of that Facebook thing is it's threaded discussion. People respect the threading in that forum. And usually there are very thoughtful comments in there, and it's searchable within the group. It's not open to Google searching it, which is a bit of a shame, but there you go. And it's permanent. The content's there forever, as far as I know, or at least until Mark Zuckerberg runs out of billions.
I think one of the important things is that you sometimes in the future, or shortly in the future, getting more face-to-face with folks, just to get this vibe in the community a little more active. During the Corona disruption, we are missing. I miss lots of you folks. I haven't seen you in years. Charlie, I haven't seen you in 3-4 years. But last week, Mark and I and Matt Gifford and some others, we met in Zurich, and I can't tell you how refreshing that is. So I really do hope that something like CF Camp comes alive again, and that we start doing conferences again, which would be awesome.
We are doing conferences happening in person this year. Adobe is committed to doing the Las Vegas CF Summit in October. Good. I can't remember the exact dates, but sometime in October, beginning thereof, I believe.
And Into the Box is in early September.
And Into the Box in Houston is coming up as well. There's also an in-person Into the Box in El Salvador for those who speak Espanol. So I do wish, I do look forward to CF Camp returning maybe next year in Europe. And if anyone listening knows any other ColdFusion events happening in person, let us know in the
There's a big
comments.
dearth of European side CFML events. I think just because of the scale of it and everything else, because the US stuff is great, but that's a big journey for a lot of developers. And there was some CF Uniteds in London, which is great for me, but I don't mind somewhere else in the rest of Europe. Because Vegas, as wonderful as heading out to a desert is, it's also a little bit far.
Yeah, it's a long way from Europe. I agree. So I think there is room for some. Maybe there's room for an informal get together, like you were saying, Gert. That could be a meetup.
And I would definitely love to have Ben to come to CF Camp finally.
Yeah, I really do want to.
I'm working on you. I'm working on you on this for years already.
It's going to pay off, I promise.
Okay, you folks out there, you heard that, right? So it's now carved in stone. Good.
Yeah, I just want to mention the Autis Box stuff. They created some Discord channels, which are very good for all their box support. They kind of moved out of Slack. I think they still have the Slack channels there, but they kind of redirect people into Discord. And Discord is a better service than Slack and doesn't have the retention issues. The posts stay there forever.
I still think that there's a gap. There is a. I mean, if we only could program websites, it'd be great. But there is a gap between forums in which you can have permanence and be able to say, this has been answered. This is a question and answer type thing, rather than we're just chewing the fat and talking. Hey, you did something wrong, etc., etc. There is a big gap, I think, for that, because all this knowledge, you're going to think, if you look at the web in a few years, all these things that we relied on, like Stack Overflow and things like that, are hidden behind Slacks and even Discord servers, right? Because if you delete a Discord server, bye-bye Discord server, It's not public. I mean, you can...
No, I think there's a benefit to getting things into Stack Overflow. Two things. One is it's Google searchable, which the Facebook group and Slack are not, except for this linen thing that Charlie mentioned. But the other reason is I'm forgetting the names, those companies that kind of look at different programming languages and, say how wonderful they are.
TIOBE. TIOBE.
They often they don't dig down that deep into Slack or Facebook groups. They just look at Stack Overflow and say, oh, there are only 3 posts about ColdFusion on Stack Overflow last month. So it's not very
Nobody's
popular.
using it, clearly, right?
Yeah, which is a bunch of BS because there are all these people, which is why I always encourage people, do post stuff into Stack Overflow because it helps pump that up as well as being searchable by Google.
And on that matter, let's just get that out because that's been a long-standing thing. The TIOBE index, TIOBE. People say, "Oh, ColdFusion's so down low in the list, if I understand correctly, it's driven by searches. Literally, they search who's searching for things. And one of the beefs I have with that is that if they don't reconcile, someone might search for ColdFusion, CFML, Cold Space Fusion, Lucee. There's so many different variants, and each of those would break
CFM.
up. CFM, right.
Yeah.
And then also someone might, ask and talk about topics and mention the specific thing and not feel the need to say ColdFusion or CFML. So it's sad that they probably underreport and underrepresent us. And I just want to throw that out to say that TIOBE thing, if you look into it, it's not a reasonable, it's not like measuring who's using the things. It's not measuring how many sites use none of that. It's based on searches. That's important.
This was a big beef from Adobe from my Adobe days, as in when I was a ACP, was that people are going like, oh well, this newfangled thing is really popular with the CTOs, right? And they'll be just looking at what was popular in TIOBE, and which is like, well, hold on a minute, you're not looking at licensing, you're not looking at like Boeing. I knew for a fact had hundreds of CFML developers. They weren't
about
searching
200,
for stuff,
I think.
Right, you're right, exactly. But those weren't marked, were they?
Yeah, and I also have to say, I think that we have about, I would say, the folks that I know, about 200 very heavily dedicated folks that are putting their work life into CFML's hands, both on Adobe's and on Lucee's side, and folks using it. And, there are other languages, like, for example, let's take Objective-C or even Ruby, that have come and gone. ColdFusion and Lucy are now here for 25 plus years, 27 years. And at least according to my future plans, it's going to be around for the next 10 years, definitely. And I still love working with it, and it's actively developed. And as long as we all keep this same enthusiasm that we have for the language itself, it won't die off. You can say whatever search says around the world, as long as people stay so enthusiastic about it, it won't die off at all. And getting new programmers into CFML or Lucee is pretty simple. Just get anyone who understands any kind of programming language, training them on CFML, on ColdFusion or Lucee, piece of cake.
I want to jump on what Gert's saying there, if I may, and give space for Ben, because Ben hasn't said much. He's been too loud this time. But, we've been going around saying for years, just get a web developer and mentor them. We've had actual, stats of new developers that have joined the company that we work for, not CFML developers. They've been ramped up in, I want to say, a week, just over that. They did CFML in a week to get their head around it. We've had a university student. He's doing his degree at the moment, so working part-time. He's been committing stuff, and he's been pushing me, saying, so where do I put the tests? They're like pushing me, to get stuff sorted out for them in the way that they want to be working, and it's great, And so I think it's a bit of a weird thing. Like, you need CFML developers. Generally, you need developers. You need smart people in your company. Isn't that right, Ben?
Yeah. Well, and I think we touched on this in part one. Is that now with modern CFML, both on the Lucee and the Adobe ColdFusion side, the code itself looks basically like a lot of other languages. Unless you're really looking at the details of how the typing's done, or some of the lower level syntax, if you open up a script-based component, it looks like a JavaScript class or a TypeScript class, or kind of like a Ruby component. I mean, it's not a huge leap for someone to come from basically any other language and look at CFML and be able to maintain it. Mm-hmm. It's just, there's not such a huge learning curve, or there's no bigger learning curve, I think, in CFML than any other language, for sure.
No, it's much smaller learning curve. The research has shown that people take 6 to 12 weeks to learn Java. They take 1 week to learn ColdFusion. I mean, that's an incredible difference.
Michaela, that just says it's easier to make. You have to be maybe not learn so much to make mistakes in CFML, but you have to learn a lot to start making mistakes in Java. Right? So you need to be very smart.
Well, I was listening to an interview a couple of weeks ago with the guy who created PHP 3, and I'm not familiar with the PHP world, so I don't know if that's like a major version or a branch of something else. But he was saying that PHP and ColdFusion came out, I think, like in the same year, and PHP has a pretty bad reputation historically. And his point of view was, yeah, it's a bad reputation because it's so easy to write. So you have a lot of people who don't have any background in application development jumping in and being able to get things done with PHP. And maybe it's not the best, but they're able to do it. So there's this very low barrier to entry. And I feel like CFML is the same way. You don't have to go through, months of theory on computer science before you can compile something that actually runs. You literally open up a text file called a .cfm file, put some output on it, and you have a working application. Like it's just that easy. So a lot of people can participate, which means there's going to be a lot of dicey code out there. But I think that's a benefit of the language, not a drawback.
I love that the Hello World example of CFML is going create a CFML file and type Hello World.
Yeah.
And the one thing that we must not forget, we all base our existence on folks not knowing how to procode,
right.
Being out there, right? So we try to help everyone. So I mean, if we're helping folks, it's mainly because they produce issues they maybe shouldn't. And so in my opinion, whenever I presented Rilo or Lucee to someone, I said there is a good thing about Lucee. It's easy to learn, and the bad thing about it is easy to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So,
but having said that, like to increase the growth of Lucee, either or CFML, I beg your pardon, I think there's a couple of challenges, and I'm gonna see if I can hold them both in my head. One of them is adoption into slightly different areas, or knowing which areas they could be adopted into. So is it just going to be a web language? And if the web becomes a lot more front-end heavy, is it just a back-end API, right? And if it is, lean into that. I mean, I know we can do REST and stuff like that, but there's a whole bunch of other things happening, like GraphQL and various other different infrastructures. So we lean into that. And the other one is other ways that languages are being used, like lambdas as an example, and therefore things like startups, so and Docker and containerization means that your server is not this precious little thing that can take 10 minutes to start up and get itself dressed and ready and put its hat on to go outside and serve people. It's like we're expecting you to start up in like less than a second, do something and then shut down and then leave that's
enough time behind, to put a G-string on, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. The Mankini comes on in at least 2 seconds, but
yeah, there you go. I think that's a great point, that modern languages and model ecosystems, they're more in the cloud or Lambda, and Lucee has done a very great job keeping up with that. Adobe ColdFusion, I feel, is a bit behind on that because of the licensing issue we thrashed to death in the last episode. Technically, it's fine. They've cut down their load size. They've given lots of packaging tools to, if you don't want to use all the features. But anyway, we mentioned conferences, and we kind of touched on finding Adobe ColdFusion and Lucy developers. But I know that's a pain point for a lot of companies using ColdFusion. So I don't know if we want to. You mentioned, Mark, that your company, you hire good developers from other languages, just cross-train them in a week on ColdFusion, which I think is an excellent solution. Any other thoughts on hiring Lucee and Adobe ColdFusion developers?
That is a complex.
I have also to say, sometimes, and I take myself as an example as well. Sometimes I'm stuck in my way of thinking. So that's why it's even a good choice not to take someone who's maybe just stuck in the CFML world. You get some new ideas, you get some new impulses to even improve the language or improve your code, think outside of the box. So in my opinion, going for different developers is just the right thing to do. And it's almost the only thing to do because it can be very challenging to find those CFML developers. And you might lose a lot of opportunities when you're narrowing down your search on LinkedIn or wherever to CFML experience.
I think the big word I would say to anyone having trouble hiring is just open yourself up to having people be remote, because a lot of people don't want to be in an office these days, or they only want to go in 1 day a week. I mean, I know Elon Musk wants everyone to be in 40 hours a week at Tesla, but I think he's making a mistake there. You know, a lot of developers work better because the problem with being in an office or a cube in an office is you get interrupted all the time. You know, it's hard to get any work done. Programming is a deep, deep thing. You've got to focus on it. You've got to hold a lot of things in your head. And some people say, you know, research says it takes 30 minutes to get back to that flow state of programming where you're really producing good code. And if you're being interrupted every 15 minutes by beeps next, you know, on the Slack channel, or you know, your manager, pointy-haired boss coming in and tapping you on the shoulder, or co-workers yapping about yesterday's football game.
But I'll agree and disagree with you. You're right. That's a situation. But one of the big things that I've tried to do since the pandemic and everything else is lean into the challenges, right? So if you have an environment that you will be, you know that you have this kind of challenge, break down your tasks smaller, you know, be able to accomplish stuff quickly. I used a technique called Pomodoro, the Pomodoro technique, which is every 25 minutes. So if you ask someone, can you just bother me in 5 minutes because I've got 25 minutes to do that. I mean, I think all the challenges in the world, sometimes they're challenges and we feel that they're a brick wall that you're hitting. But sometimes you just have to lean into that thing. Being remote, as you say, is one of the challenges. We have to be separate. The best people are across the country. Well, lean into being remote. Oh, they're in a different time zone. Well, lean into communicating. What can you do to communicate better, right? Oh, but I'm a manager and I want my whole team to have a meeting or stand up at the same time. Why don't you get them to write their stand-up notes every day? And that way everyone keeps informed and keeps churning, right? It's try to lean into these challenges a lot more. You know, okay, so we don't have enough CFML programmers and every one of them is really old and looks like me. Why don't we train up some people? You know, lean into that. Okay, fine, we can't find them. So what do we have to do? We have to train them up, you know?
Yeah, or some people teach at local community colleges. I know several community colleges where there are ColdFusion courses. So I noticed Charlie wrote down CFML training down there in your resource page. I want to call out to folks that is good.
Yeah, so there are several free training resources. I just want to make that point real clear. There's several. There's ones from different people, different organizations, ones that are updated even recently. So this was following on the topic of bringing new people on. Point them to that resource and let them find which any of those they find compelling. From Ortis's modern CFML in 100 minutes, that's basically training, and there's many, many more.
Well, I mean, I just want to mention Adobe, TerraTech, and Ortis, and probably other people have great YouTube channels. This podcast goes on our YouTube channel as well as going out on, iTunes and all the other stuff. And those are all free. And then CF Casts has some free content, but it has hundreds of things. They even dump their whole full day training thing onto there. So you pay $30 a month or whatever it is if you pay annually. And you can access all that training. And it's not just box stuff. They have ColdFusion stuff in there. And also, I just want to give a shout out to the Adobe ColdFusion certification, which they dropped the price on to basically their cost, which is $150 they have to pony out to the people who do the testing. And that contains 24 hours of video training on, Adobe ColdFusion 2021, as well as you get the test where you can see where your gaps are, because like you scored good in this area, but you didn't score so great in that area. So lots of training stuff. And does Linda still have ColdFusion stuff? I'm not sure. No, Charlie's shaking his head.
They got folded.
Linda is no more.
LinkedIn.
I'm sorry. Oh dear. And then there are podcasts out there. There's this podcast, CF Live. There's the Ortis Modernize or Die podcast, and its various flavors. Their news flavor and their more in-depth flavor. I'm giving the wrong technical terms for that. And then Ben, you have a podcast. Tell us the name of your podcast.
Yeah, it's the Working Code podcast. It's headed up by Adam Tuttle. Adam Tuttle, I would describe as a recovering ColdFusion programmer, so he might hesitate to call it a ColdFusion podcast, but I certainly try to sneak ColdFusion and ColdFusion adjacent topics in as much as I possibly can.
Is he again working with CF?
He straddles the CF and Node.js world.
Oh, okay. And then, Mark, what happened to your local host podcast? Is that still cranking out, or is that hiatus?
I think it's hiatus. We went too big, and it's just too much time. I've been doing another podcast on game development called the Level Design Podcast. So there's only so many podcasts that you need a bald white guy in.
Well, maybe we can just start it off again, Mark. Just maybe.
I think so. I've been doing a lot more stuff now that I want to talk about, which before I wasn't. So,
I have a question though. I would like to sneak something in, if that's, and I would like to hear different opinions from Charlie and Ben. Maybe we just recently had a ticket that Lucy wasn't following an Adobe functionality how it was. The functionality has been introduced by Lucy about a couple of years ago, and it now in CF 2021 has been introduced, but it doesn't follow quite how we did it. Now, we have been asked to just change our functionality to follow ACF no matter what, and I'm inclined not to, because there might be code out there. Yeah, there might be code out there that is already using the functionality, and in my opinion, it is now a living and breathing organism, CFML. It's not only Adobe defining it and everyone else has to follow suit, because it goes both ways. We actually follow what Adobe does, and Adobe sometimes follows stuff that Lucy does. Right?
Ask Elon to put petrol in his cars.
Yeah, kind of. And I am more or less inclined, or not inclined, I'm actually convinced that once something has been out there for a while, it should be staying as it is, because we would break compatibility to existing code. And I know of certain applications that wouldn't work properly anymore without an update. Don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, you've got it two ways, right? Obviously, you did it the better way, right, Gert, rather than what the cloned version done in Adobe was. I'm just joking there. I mean, who knows? I don't know the details of that. But the issue is people migrate between the two versions. A lot of people migrate from Adobe ColdFusion Lucy. Some people migrate from Lucy to Adobe ColdFusion, according to our State of the Union survey. And then, so I would, if you think you've implemented it better, keep it that way. Maybe you have a way to run it their way, a compatibility switch if you feel like it, or if someone really needs it, they pay for that through.
Yeah. I can tell you what we have done in the past. So, for example, if there were different arguments or attributes used, they were just called differently. We just put a link or an alternative version that can be used as well. Like, for example, CF loop index item or key value. So in Lucy, you can use key value, and in ColdFusion, you can use index and item, right? We now just allow both of them.
Yeah,
right.
That's a great way approach, because really for the ColdFusion users, they really don't care what Adobe or Lucy thinks so much as is the code compatible. That's one of the major selling. I know you don't charge money for Lucy, but the major selling feature of Lucy is it's 99% compatible with Adobe ColdFusion.
Yeah.
Or when I talk to people, that's what they're interested in. Can we easily move our CF9 app over to Lucy, because we don't want to go through the headache of upgrading to ColdFusion 2021 and the costs involved with that.
Go ahead.
I will mention another thing that is really good for Adobe ColdFusion, and I believe for Lucy, which is backwards compatibility. There's quite an effort done to retest old code and make sure it still runs in the new release version. And I think that's pretty important, because people have, I don't know how much legacy ColdFusion code there is out there. I was going to say billions of lines of code. I'd be interested to kind of get a guess on how much, but there's a lot. Yeah. And if you can't, when you install the new version, if you have to go through headaches, it's a problem. And I know Adobe has like an enormous library of user donated code, so they can backwards test stuff and make sure A, it runs at all without errors, and B, it runs efficiently. So I know that's some of the optimizations they did. They made sure that some of that code that you were talking about earlier, Ben and Mark, that wasn't written so well because they were, maybe newbie developers, still runs efficiently.
I think that's not usually the problem, though. The problem is not like written code. Generally, the problem is going to be stuff like, well, we use like CF Form UI stuff. We use CF Flash. We use a lot of like CF Ajax and things that are completely replaced in modern CFML. And it depends what the goal of Lucee is going to be. If the goal of Lucee is going to be just your stepping off point for not paying for ACF and your application is going to 100% run, I don't see that as a much growth industry. That's a cul-de-sacking industry. As in, for while we're doing Lucee, right? We wanted to like features that I ask for at the moment because of my DevOps hat is like it has to start quick. It has to be able to be configurable. It has to be configurable from in Docker images. We should be able to. The image should be smaller. We should only add what we need. Things like that, which bring it to life, bring it into the, I say, modern environment. Like I come from the ancient times, but I mean, from my day-to-day development changes, having Lucee as a goal of being the way for you to just eke out a few more years of your multi-million dollar application for free. I don't think that's a goal for Lucee. I mean, it shouldn't be. It should be like a third priority at best. I
agree. I'm sorry if I
CF Mobile is not going to be. CF Mobile is not going to be in it.
This is a creative challenge for both the Adobe development team and the Lucee development team.
Right.
You're developing new versions. You want to bring along the people from the old versions. You want to add cool new features, improve the performance, improve the security, all the great stuff everyone does. And at the same time, you've got to make it easy for people to migrate their apps. Because if you do what some languages have done, where they totally redid the language, I think PHP was guilty of this. I can't name the version numbers they did it between, but they made it, or Python. Python did this between Python 2 and Python 3. It's totally effing incompatible. What an idiot move, guys. I mean, I know you had good technical reasons for doing that, and you wanted to get rid of a lot of technical debt, but like, for the regular Joe or Jane programmer, it's the disaster zone because now you've got to rewrite all the code.
But that's a simple solution. I think might agree with me, might not. Well, maybe Lucee users might or might not agree with me. Is the fact that you can easily upgrade, and there's multiple releases a year. We have multiple releases, like one a month, if not more. Now, the problem here is that for Adobe is that they do like a massive step release that you have to pay for every year or so, if not more, every 18 months, 2 years, every 2 years.
Every 2 years,
right? So like if you change the model, which they've done with a Photoshop and everything else, to say, hey, look, this is a license thing. I'm not in the business side of stuff, so that there's reasons probably why that doesn't work. But the continuous distribution of features would mean that people are maintaining up to date. There's less security issues. Security updates, I mean, I know they're separate and free and stuff like that, but it's saying that the mechanism that that your app's engine is being updated frequently, the same way that Chrome does.
Well, let's distinguish updates.
I think that's a great, I think that's a topic. I think I'm just going to interrupt you, Charlie. I think that's a topic and several other things we could talk about in another episode if you guys are up for it, because I know Gert has a urgent thing he needs to go to, and he extended himself for 10 extra minutes into the show. Appreciate that, Gert. So why don't we wrap this one up now? If you're interested in doing another panel, or some of you are, happy to do it. It's been a great discussion. Lots of stuff I didn't even know about in ColdFusion that I learned from it. If anyone listening has suggestions for a future panel topics, please let us know. We do have a few things left over that we added in here that we didn't get time to cover. And if people want to find each of you online, what's the one best way to find you online? Charlie.
Carehart.org, CAREHART, Carehart.org, or Carehart on all social media.
Mr. Gert.
Well, in the Slack dev, in Lucee dev, or somewhere there, you can find me. I'm mostly there.
There aren't that many Gert Franzes in the world. So. Ben.
There is one in my home city. There is one, and I'm not related to him.
It's funny.
Even written in the same way as I am.
Ben Nadel, how can people find you?
I write on bennadel.com, and then at Ben Nadel on Twitter is probably the easiest way to just ping me.
Mr. Mark.
Well, if you want to have a laugh about how old how few articles I've posted on my blog, you can go to markdrew.io. And I did write one this year, but there's one from 2 years ago before it and stuff like that. Or you can find me on Mark Drew on Twitter.
And folks can find me on teratech.com. That's only one R, TERATECH.com. I post blog articles several times a month, and same with podcast episodes. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and somewhat active on Twitter and other things. Well, thanks, guys. Viva ColdFusion and Viva Lucee. I kind of include Lucee and Adobe ColdFusion in the phrase ColdFusion. So I think it's all good stuff. And hope to see you all another time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Get detailed show notes on today's episode in your free CF Alive Modern ColdFusion Guide at teratech.com. That is teratech.com. Viva la CF Alive Revolution!